Welcome to PowerLunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. We do the program every Tuesday through Friday around 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Welcome. It's great to be with you this week. It's Tuesday. And, the point of the program is to bring on today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, corporate leaders, CEOs, people who are doing amazing work in the world, people who can help us get better at what we do. That's why we do the program. The fun part about that, to me, is that it can be interactive. So get on the computer, ask your questions. We're broadcasting on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and I think a couple other platforms. And ask your questions. We monitor those platforms during the show, and get to the questions that you want answers to. Please like or share the program if you don't mind. We can benefit from the growth of the show, but we can also, your network, your friends, your colleagues can learn from these conversations as well, we hope. Today, it's my pleasure to have Dr. John Johnson, who's founder and CEO of Edgeworth Economics, a world-class economic consulting firm, and Edgeworth Analytics, a company that focused on using data analysis and human resources and other business services. John has taught at Georgetown University and has been published in numerous books, journals, and magazines. John received his Ph.D. from MIT and is author of Everydata, the Misinformation Hidden in the Data You Consume Every Day. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great. Interesting times.
It definitely is interesting times.
Maybe that's an understatement.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, unprecedented is a term used a little too frequently, but it definitely applies here.
Yeah, you're right. That is used a lot. Maybe it's for lack of better word these days, I guess. Having an economist like yourself that people can talk to, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Your background is incredible, and I wanted to have you on so that we could sort of talk about data and all the information that's out there and how to interpret it and how to think about it. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there's a lot of misinterpreting data, whether it's intentional or not. But from an economist perspective, what are your thoughts on the economic outlook and the economy? Is what we're hearing in the news, the data that we're hearing, is that accurate? Is it skewed? Or what's your thought?
Yeah, look, I think
that's a big question. Sorry, but
I'll try to break it down. I mean, look, there's lots of different types of economists. Economists focus on different things. One of my areas of expertise is called labor economics, which is really about unemployment and things like that. And that's a really pivotal issue right now because that is the heart of kind of what's going on. So let's start with the labor picture, because I think that's pretty important. This is not a time where there is exaggeration. These unemployment numbers that are coming out are staggering and unprecedented historically. I think, one of the analogies I always use is, we're trying to figure out what does it really mean when you see numbers, 27 million, 33 million unemployment claims. If you think about the sea level rising in equivalence to that, right now, the city of Atlanta would be underwater. It would have risen quite a bit. All right. So I don't want to, downplay the numbers. The numbers are serious. Where they're coming out is pretty significant, and that does represent real economic pain. Clearly, there are sectors that have been hit very, very hard. The restaurant sector, tourism, airlines, but it's starting to broaden out, and we're seeing that in sort of the notices that are released. One of the things we don't yet have full information.
That's going to impact. Because of that, that's not only going to impact the service industry, but ultimately manufacturing, cars, products, right?
Once you have this kind of economic slowdown, you start to see changes in consumer behavior. You start to see all of those things. And also the separate issue that I still don't think has gotten a lot of attention is just the supply chain issues that could start to come about. We saw a story about some of the meat packing facilities that have sort of had to shut down because of that. So there's, I think what makes this complicated from an economic perspective is it's an economic recession that has been driven by a health crisis. All right. So if there's some good news, although the numbers, if you tried to put them in historical perspective, you have to go back to the Great Depression to see numbers like this. What is different than other recessions? What is different than the 1982 recession with stagflation, or with the 2008, 2009, the asset crisis and the bubble, the housing bubble. Here, we know what's causing this. We had to shut the economy down. So right. Hope is that when it is time to reopen, this would be more akin to the types of recessionary activity or downturns we see from a natural disaster, where there's a shock to the system. The problem, though, and where it gets complicated, and I don't want to speak outside my area of expertise, but I'm not an epidemiologist, but you can't deal with the economic issues separate from the public health issues. So when you see issues with testing and how other countries have dealt with this, if you don't fundamentally get a handle on some of these public health issues, you can open up parts of the economy again, and you could end up right back where you are now if you haven't managed the health crisis effectively. So it's a complicated situation, but there is at least some room to believe, at least we know what's causing it. So hopefully that means a recovery, although it may not be instantaneous. And I think some of the stories you see about this having a V shape where it's going to come back as quickly as it declined, I don't think that's very realistic. But there is opportunity and at least some cause for hope that it will rebound, and we can get back to, I don't know what the new normal will be, but hopefully not this level of economic pain.
I know this is probably speaking out of your expertise, but there's a degree of psychology in all of this, right? Where people have to feel safe to go back to work. They have to feel safe to go to a restaurant again. They have to feel safe to go to a college football game. For that kind of activity to happen, there's got to be a degree of feeling safe, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the insights from economics, there is a whole field called behavioral economics where we've actually sort of meshes psychology with economics. And so these kinds of concerns, like what is it that sort of creates consumer confidence? Or what is it that would allow people to go back? Again, in a health crisis, if people don't feel confident going to a restaurant where they can go sit, they're not going to go. Maybe takeout food can come back or not, but what is going to mean for a lot of these things? Sitting in a football stadium, going to a movie theater. So without dealing with the underlying fear, that is another very big issue. And it seems, at least from the perspective is, if you can do systematic testing, if you can do different types of isolation, if you can actually sort of trace when there are cases, that is the most successful formula for sort of dealing with this. And that's the way people will have confidence. So when you see things about testing, without widespread testing, it is at least hard to see what the pathway back is.
And this is a question that just came up, and if you don't want to answer it, I understand. But I was just thinking about this. There's a lot been made about the stimulus money. Is that going? Has the government gone far enough in propping up? That's an awful word to use, but giving people, particularly individuals, enough money. You look at what the UK is doing. I think it's a couple €1,000 a month, for the next 4 months or something like this. But have they gone far enough in helping people get through this?
That's tough. We did a study, actually, our analytics firm tried to look at what do people spend $1,200 on? Because that was the amount of the stimulus, right? What do people spend in their lives, right? A large part of that money usually goes to housing, right? That's first. Transportation and food. Okay. Now the transportation costs are maybe not as much, but if you put it in this perspective, take someone who is below the poverty line making $15,000 a year. $1,200 barely covers 1 month pay for that person. All right. Never mind when you get up to even two family earners where you got $2,400 and you're, $100,000 earners. So it is a yes, I'm not saying it's not helpful. I'm not saying it's not real money, but it is a relatively small part of the spending profile for anyone, almost at any level of the income distribution. And so that's kind of where I think the issues come. There are always challenges with government policy and government intervention. A phrase that used to go around MIT is, a good economist knows when markets work and markets fail and knows the difference. And so if you're going to craft effective interventions, you have to know what the market failures are. Otherwise, you create winners and losers unintentionally. And so with all of these programs, what is the consequences of, the idea was to get money in people's pockets as quickly as possible. And that meant using a very blunt tool to just push money out. And that might well have been the right policy decision, but there are always consequences. The same with the small business loans. Get as much money out as quickly as possible, but administered in a certain way. So then you see stories about Ruth Chris Steakhouse or whatever getting loans and sort of that brushback. So I'm not saying that to be critical. Policymakers are in a tough spot here too. This is unprecedented, but as a practical matter, we are making a series of difficult trade-offs on all of these things. And that's really the challenge. If the crisis continues and it cannot reopen, it's not clear to me how that is enough stimulus. If the purpose is to provide a safety net, if the purpose is just to try to sort of Band-Aid, that's a political question, I guess, ultimately.
Is it? I heard a number. I've heard a couple times now, anywhere between 15 and 20% of your GDP is what we would need to spend to really get out of, to help boost the economy to get out of this. Does that make sense, or is that?
I don't know that I've seen those numbers. Again, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Again, I'm not going to, but right. Yeah, I don't know, but I do think generally, if you try to compare this to the 2008, 2009 stimulus packages, right? I mean, another really deep situation, and we're even the amounts, the 2 trillion, the 3 trillion, they're not close to really what ultimately probably would be required if the government is the main form of intervention to get the economy back going. If you're trying to stimulate different things, if you're trying to create, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, I suspect. But as I said, I tend to specialize more on the labor side than the macroeconomic side. So I don't,
do you think small business, the small business landscape is forever changed?
Well, forever is a long time, but because I don't know that in 2008, 2009, we thought the economy would come back this strong as it did. But right now, at least, that is a group that is really potentially hurting, partly because of the industries where small businesses may well be. How can you be responsive to your customer base in this situation? I know, I run a small firm. I'm at about 100 employees. We have had a lot of practices in place, and I know we've tightened them all up. And, it's been a real chance to sort of look closely at what we do in terms of managing the business, making sure everything we're on top of all that. How can we be more responsive to our clients at all times? What are the types of things that matter? So I think a lot of businesses are going through that. And, some where, if it's a small business like a restaurant that has no customers left, that's really difficult to pivot. I feel very fortunate. I'm in an industry where there is still work going on. But I think ultimately what these things tend to do is they tend to force, again, trying to be a little positive, they tend to force innovation, and they tend to force some kind of new creation of, this is an opportunity in this environment to try to do something. But that doesn't, that requires patience, and that doesn't always pay the bills. Like, there's a lot of trial and error. So I do think there will be fundamental changes. There always are from these kind of economic downturns. I'm hopeful that it doesn't have to be so profound that, nothing is the same as what we knew before.
What do you think the opportunity, with analytics and data, it seems like you're really positioned well, like your company would be really positioned well, because I think particularly right now, we're operating on imperfect. It's never, business data is never perfect, and you're often making, some sort of educated guess. It seems like we're operating in a much larger unknown right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I just think that you're really positioned well, because the data and the studies that you're doing could be really helpful to business.
Well, I hope they are. Obviously, one of the things we've been doing a lot of is we've sort of done a lot of public studies on coronavirus numbers in terms of economic impacts. We have a really great interactive map. When Maryland let out their zip code level data, we actually have a zip code level data mapped to census data where we can talk about the demographics. So you can actually spot, there's been a lot of questions about population density, racial differences, income level disparities, and you can actually see them. So I think, from a public service point, we're trying to put out studies on that, which I think is useful. But I think more broadly, my approach and the approach of our firm to data analytics and more generally is that, all data is somewhat imperfect. what you have to do is sort of be able to separate what is the best available conclusions you can make based on the data. Even I've heard a lot of things, well, this is so unprecedented. How can we do anything based on past data? Well, what's our choice? Is our choice to just say, well, then we'll just throw our hands in the air and say, we'll just no, nothing. So I understand that there are caveats about what can be concluded or not. I think really good data analysis for a business person answers a specific question, uses data that is available and known enough to identify, okay, here's what I can interpret, here's what I can't, and makes sense. One of the things I spend a lot of my time on is trying to make data simple. I mean, part of my job is in my economics firm is I testify as an expert witness. And so in that world, I have to testify to judges and juries about what data sets mean. And, those people don't want to be there usually. They don't want to hear that, right? In the consulting side of my business, where I deal with businesses and nonprofits and industry associations, there we're trying to help. What can you use your data for to message effectively? What is it that, and so in this environment where you've got a lot of uncertainty, you've got a lot of questions, we're just trying to provide insights to potential, to anyone in terms of, well, the data is necessarily incomplete. This is like a giant mystery or a giant jigsaw puzzle. We've got little pieces, but if we can look at it in a couple of different ways and think about it, maybe there are some valuable insights there. And I think that's really got to be the approach in these times, is thinking hard about the data may not be perfect, but we have to understand what we do have and try to draw insights. Because again, I don't think the alternative of throwing our hands in the air and just speculating wildly is actually a pretty smart thing to do.
Not if you want to last, right? Not if you want to survive.
And it's a form of a competitive advantage. People that are willing to look at data, they do get ahead. And this is my belief. If you are willing to work with the data, that is a huge source of opportunity for anyone in terms of running a business, thinking about a business. You can really learn a lot about your customers, your clients, your past performance. I think all entrepreneurs, small business owners, I think all business people have this intuitive instinct about the businesses they're in. Oh, well, this is the way it's done. This is the way it works. And I wouldn't discount that instincts do matter. But I think when you cross-reference that and validate that with data, you are in such a better position both to catch your blind spots or to know that you're on the right track. But it's not a panacea. It's something that has to constantly be looked at, updated, thought about, changed, pivot. I know I did that in my own company. When we started with our remote workforce, we changed the nature of the reporting that we were doing so that I could look at different numbers, because I thought it was important to sort of track certain things in a slightly different way than we were before. That's part of what has to happen.
I know this is not where we were going to plan to take this conversation, but because I do want to get to the election stuff in a minute, but you're bringing up some really interesting things to me, because I know exactly what you're talking about. I felt like I would put my and when I ran my manufacturing company, I would just see where I felt like I was literally making decisions. I was guessing most of the time, right? And I hated that. Absolutely hated that. But I didn't have the skill set in my organization to with good data. We had data, but interpreting that data and understanding it and being able to read it was a whole nother thing. And I didn't have that capacity. And we got really lucky. But I know what you mean. And I wish we had more capacity on the data side to be able to interpret it and look at it and read it and give us a good understanding of it. And I think that's tough for small business, isn't it?
It's really tough. I mean, the thing that and it's tough for big business too. I mean, this is not a small business, but I think the first thing I always tell people is data does not come ready to use for the purpose you need it. Data comes ready. So that is one of the fundamental issues whenever we consult with a client or try to help them out. It's like, wait a second, your data is not configured. So let's start with the question. What is the set of questions that you really need the most business intelligence in? And where do you think we're going to find the answer? All right. So now let's think about what data exists, what's feasible to actually get our hands on, because it's often the case too. Like, yeah, I love data. If you want to tell me you're going to give me every piece of data in your company, I would love that just from the pure intellectual part. I love to play with numbers all day, but that's not necessarily helpful to you as a business. It's not enough. Let's just use all the data. What's the right data to answer this question, given these limitations? And when we get to the end of this, if we give you an answer like this, will that be useful and actionable for you or not? But that's really, I think, the foundation of any data analytics work. People talk about business analytics, business insights. Really, it has to be centered back on what is the question? Is it answerable with your data? How important is it to you? And then the other part that is a bit of a gap is, all right, so we're going to try some different techniques, different statistics. And we're going to do a regression analysis. And what does that mean? But if you can't understand the basics of what was done for you or what you did in tandem with your data analysts, it's also useless. So it's not easy, but there are concrete steps people can take, even small businesses, to break through and get some insights. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a project that it sucks up all of the resources of the firm to do that.
Is it easy? I know this is way out of what we were going to talk about, but I find it fascinating because is it hard to find the right because it seems to me you hire somebody like you to come in and help us set up a process to get this data right.
Right.
And so how do you do that? Like, how do you
Look, what we generally do, and again, there's a lot of different possibilities for firms. Like what we try to do, and a lot of our focus is on, can we take someone from what is the question to what is the answer? Right. That's the way we sort of approach this. So look, there's lots of technology in terms of things. We often sort of have to come in and help sort of pull certain data sets or work with the right people. Say, okay, here's the data that you have. And we're usually thinking about first, what is the data you currently have to answer the question that's pressing? That's before we get to, I want a dashboard. I want some kind of future process. That's a little bit secondary. Let's see if we can answer the question first. So there is a lot of time spent talking to companies about what data sets they have, who holds the data sets. We did one of the things we do is we do education sessions, and we had a HR group that we were meeting with, sort of a number of HR people across a very large firm. And when we were talking to them, it was interesting because although we were teaching about HR techniques, what really came out of it was the facilitation of who in the firm had which data sets that they could use to answer each other's questions. And they hadn't really been talking about data. They've been talking to each other, but they weren't talking about which data sets they had. In a smaller business, it's easier, but look, personnel data sets are kept for payroll and promotions and things like that. Accounting databases are kept to get the bills out and things like that. You want to turn that into actionable intelligence. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some identification, some cleaning, some scoping. And that is the hard part. Again, I come back to data is not ready to use. And so as a result, people throw their hands in the air because it's so frustrating. And I get that. But that's the kind of stuff we try to help people with. It's like, okay, we can help you. I view it as a partnership where I'm trying to take somebody by the hand and guide them through the process. Not that they necessarily, the next time they have a question, they could do it all themselves, but they're going to understand a lot better the next time what they need to do, where they need help and where they don't. And I think that's really the key to good data, is just learning how to trust your instincts, how to take that business instinct that people intuitively have and match that in a way that it can actually map into the data so the data does tell the story or refutes the story if it's not true.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And it sounds like what you can do is really help people get to that information and get to and figure out how to use it and mine it and put it in a usable format that is actionable, right? One way or the other.
Exactly look, I was a professor for a few years, and I was only 2 years because I was going to be the most popular professor on the University of Illinois campus, but I wasn't very, it was just too lonely and it wasn't practical enough, right? So when I talk to people now in this life, which, that was like 25 years ago, in this life, I want to take that knowledge and make it accessible to people. The teacher never leaves you, but in terms of practical business advice, how can we take that information and make it actionable? If it doesn't have a purpose, if it's just an academic exercise,
right,
it doesn't work for your small business or your large business or any business. You've got to understand what you're trying to do and do the best you can. But unfortunately, the real world is imperfect, right? If I have to have a perfect answer from the data, I could be going forever. I've got to sometimes make choices and make decisions and say, okay, this is where the limitations are. And so that notion that good data analysis has ranges, it's not an answer, it's a range of answers. Sometimes it deals with probabilities. Well, this is what it looks like, but this is possible. That can be frustrating. But again, if you contrast it with the alternative, which is, well, I'll just trust my instincts blindly and hope nothing changed, or I'll throw my hands in the air, right? So at least if you have ranges and a realistic perspective on what data can or can't do for you, I think that's the real key to, good data analytics.
Yeah, and it's just about, for me, it's having a little more information, right? And if I can make a decision based on 75% versus 50, I'll take those odds any day, right?
Right. It's just being better informed. And look, I'm a baseball fan. I like to go watch baseball, and I don't pay any attention to sabermetrics at all because that's my hobby. Like I don't want to, a postman doesn't like to take a walk. I don't want to deal with statistics all day on that. But in the real world, I think knowing what you can and can't do with data and statistics is good, right? There was this whole move in baseball where, scouts were completely replaced by some, and it was purely numbers. And, there are different feelings. I think a little bit more pragmatic approach that it doesn't have to be, all one or all the other is probably useful in the real world. There are times when the data will tell you something pretty definitive. Don't get me wrong. And I've had some challenging conversations with clients where I've had to tell them, you may believe this, but your data is really clearly telling me that. And that's, but more often than not, it doesn't work that way. More often than not, it's, oh, your data is sort of pointing to this. Maybe you didn't see this or this too, but it's generally in the right direction. So,
yeah. So let's switch gears. I want to talk about elections and media, and because I think that people are really paying attention now to what's going on. And how do you think the pandemic is going to affect this election cycle? Well, what does the data say to that?
So look, I think the first thing that we've seen in the data, the polling data. So again, I'm not a pollster. I'm someone who interprets polls. I don't go run polls. I look at the data and sort of do that. And so, when we've looked at the data so far that's sort of coming out from the various polls, the things that are starting to appear first. At a high level, it's going to be a very different campaign just because of the fact that you can't have rallies, you can't have those kinds of things. Oftentimes, second elections are referendums on the incumbent. I think in this context, this has probably made this even more so.
Yeah.
Now you've got a up or down, right? Like, what do you think about the performance of the administration with coronavirus? It's all coronavirus all the time. Could that change by November? It could, but unlikely. I mean, because I still think even if this progresses in a way where states start to open up, well, then what happens? Does the economy rebound or not? I think there's no way around the fact that this is probably going to be the theme of the election. A few things sort of historically, if you look at, there's a lot of talk about sort of crisis bumps for incumbents. After 9/11, George W. Bush's approval ratings went up to about 80%, right? There was a bump for Donald Trump, but it was about 1% or so. And it has completely eroded already. So now you've seen declining approval ratings, which is sort of, and they were already kind of in this 40-ish range. So that's one thing we've seen. And then you start to see sort of in the key states, because again, the whole key to thinking about polling numbers is this is 50 state elections, right? Part of why things were missed in the last election is because people kept looking at national numbers. They didn't assess the real quality of the state numbers in the Midwest. There was a lot of correlation across the Rust Belt and how voters were going to vote. And it was just this bubble that was missed repeatedly. So, but when you start to look at numbers, early numbers in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in the Midwest, in Michigan, you are seeing some significant leads for Biden well outside the margin of error so far. Now, you need to be cautious because that's still a long time. But as a practical matter, this could be an election which is more focused on the incumbent than any we've seen in our lifetime.
I saw something this morning I read that I was fascinated by, is that he's doing better with older people now than any Democrat has in the last 20 years. He's people over 60 to 65, that age range, and then even 50 to 65, he's doing better. It's closer than it has been in any recent election. That he's getting really close in those numbers, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the Democratic primary, that was also his base. Like, interestingly, Biden did very, very well with older voters throughout. Um, you know, I don't know what, I mean, if you think about what this is going to, we talked earlier about the psychological effects of all this. What is it going to mean in terms of psychology? Well, that same psychology is going to play into the election and what people think. The amount of economic pain that a family feels or an individual feels, the number, the direct exposure to someone who's either sick or died as a result of the coronavirus, these very concrete things that affect people will definitely tend to affect your voting patterns. And so, yes, there's a lot of noise out there, of course, and there's a lot of sort of acrimony around politics. But as a practical matter, the referendum on the incumbent president is often the theme of a re-election anyway. And here you've got a lot more concrete things where people could be voting against, against something. And so that's partly why you start to see the stories about the Senate races and the Republican concern over the Senate races with some of these numbers, because this could turn into a down ballot wave. On the other hand, if the response improves or the economy improves, you could also see it go the other direction. So this really could be, as I said, an election about Donald Trump and very little about Joe Biden.
I wonder if that's why you don't hear him saying very much right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's a little more political strategy, but it is interesting because you're right. I mean, there is this news vacuum where it's just, you don't see Biden, even when Biden gives speeches from his basement or whatever, it's just not, it's not about him. It's really not.
There's got to be some polling numbers in there that say, just shut up. don't. Right. Because that, I mean, honestly.
I haven't seen those, but I mean, I don't know. But it is an interesting, I think, again, like everything else, it's an unprecedented time. And so what does it mean? How do you even campaign in this environment? I don't know. I mean, maybe
they're trying to figure that out. Maybe that's the whole silence. You talk about misleading forecasts and data leading to not really understanding, or the media misinterpreting this data. What do you mean by that? What is how does that manifest itself, I guess, or what is it?
So, I mean, I think that the issue really is that I'm not casting aspersions on any media per se. Like, there are some parts of the media that have agendas. I'm not going to refute that. But let's just talk more generally about sort of, journalists are not necessarily trained to use data or to interpret data. They're on a deadline. They're telling stories. They're trying to tell what their story is. They're looking for pieces of their story. So if you already have a situation that's a little bit muddled with the data, where the data is not easy to interpret, not readily available, we start to see narratives get created, which at times are a little bit lazy. And those narratives can be problematic. I think one of the things, like, let's take an example from the coronavirus right now. We've been looking at testing data, trying to see what are the tests. And Maryland has been very transparent. They put out a couple of weeks ago zip code level data on testing. And that's interesting data, and we have maps and things, and we're trying to compare them. But as a practical matter, the testing disproportionately gets done on people that are sick. Okay, so what does it tell you when you see high increases in the number of coronavirus? Does it tell you that we've hit a peak, or does it tell you we're just testing more and we're testing the people that are sick, so we don't know if we're at the peak yet at all?
Right.
That's a really challenging question, but that difference is critical to whether we should be reopening right now, because if it just reflects that we're testing lots and lots of sick people, maybe we don't know. If it actually represents something that's a little bit more representative, well, then we can see what these declines in the number of cases. But with these different moving parts in the analysis, it's nearly impossible to know right now. And so that is a huge problem. And you don't see that explained very much. I mean, there's a little bit, but you don't see that very much. And so even when people are trying to be data-driven with news stories, it's more about the soundbite. It's more about the cute, anecdote. What does the number mean? It's hard because good data analysis doesn't lend itself to sound bites. There's always a caveat. There's always a, hey, here's what it means. And people want answers, and the media really wants to give answers. They don't like to write the story that's like, well, it could mean this or this or this.
Yeah, we don't know.
Right. And I understand that. I mean, nobody likes the economist on the one hand versus the other, right? The famous Harry Truman quote, But the real world is like that. The real world is not black and white. There's a lot of gray. And so you're trying to figure out where you are in the gray.
Is this is just from your perspective, and I understand that if you don't answer, but is there a way to extrapolate the infection rate right now? We're not doing nearly enough testing, right? Is there a way to figure out what to get to whether or not we're flattening the curve? I mean, is there a real reliable way to do that, even though we're not doing enough testing?
Well, it's difficult because you need some benchmark somewhere, right? So either you need to know first that you are testing in a systematic way, such that you're not that the technical phrase is sample selection, that you're not just oversampling sick people when you test, right?
Okay.
You can try to compare the death rates for the U.S. versus death rates for other countries, and sort of see, okay, well, if the death rate looks like it's this high, and it's way, way higher than anywhere else, well, maybe does that mean it's more virulent here, or does that mean maybe we don't have the right number of people that aren't getting sick, right? So I think you can triangulate and start to figure it out. And then I think you can try to look at the trends. We're trying to look at the daily changes in Maryland and see if we can tease anything out of that. But the hard part about exponential growth, which is what this does, is it goes really fast, and small little differences can make that, exponential. That curve can really take off with small little differences. So that's part of the challenge with this. But I do think there's more that can be done. And I think you've seen some studies about trying to line up what the death rate over total tests is to death rates in other country, and can that give us some estimates, those kind of things. But also, there's a lot of variables. Different countries are doing so many different things. So it's a hard problem. That doesn't mean we shouldn't rely on the data, but it does mean simple answers are not necessarily the solution.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it's pretty complicated. I mean, and it's a moving target, right? The more you test, again, the better that data becomes, and so on. So
right, but then how do you sort of suddenly have, you've got 50 governors who are trying to make decisions based on whatever information and political environment and hurting public? I mean, it's a difficult, as I said, I am a very big fan of data, and I believe we can use it to inform these decisions. I think simplistic analyses are really problematic in this setting. And I think that would be a big caveat is, you see these proclamations, oh, we flattened the curve, oh, we're on the back end. I think we better be really careful about that.
Yeah, making a declarative statement like that right now seems premature.
I would be uncomfortable doing that.
Yeah, I wouldn't as a politician, that's for sure. Sort of the last question is, how can we be better consumers and smarter consumers of data, and whether it be about coronavirus, whether it be about the election? How can we as consumers who are getting our news and our information from hopefully multiple sources, but how can we be better as consumers about our data and the information we're consuming?
Yeah. So look, I think first and foremost is, I'm not telling people they have to be cynical about every number they see, but pausing when you see a number and thinking about things like, what's the source? What's the narrative I'm being told? Does that make any sense? And is there some alternative explanation that's not being told to me? One of my favorite examples from the book and from my TEDx talk was about Starbucks, and the idea that living near a Starbucks raises your home values. And I was like, oh,
really? That's right.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, what if it's the case that Starbucks strategically places their stores in places where people can afford a $5 latte? And in fact, they do have a model that does that, right? But the headline was pretty interesting. So, but with a little bit of thought, you could figure that out yourself, right? So I realize people don't want to always go and dig deep into every source, but at least be cognizant that there's, what are the numbers coming from? What's the sourcing? What's the narrative? And what can I critically bring to the table? Just my own thinking that says, does that make sense or not? That sort of takes you far away. As I said, I try to teach people to trust their instincts, but verify with data. So that would be my best advice is, as you're getting information, understand what it means, understand the limitations.
I guess that would apply. I just thought of another thing when you said something, sparked another question. As a business owner, how do I figure out, and I just want to ask you from your business perspective and where you might find this, but I'm struggling right now with, do I open back up?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I do it?
Right.
Is there data that I can really rely on to make a good decision, whether the governor of my state or whether the local authorities, whatever, no matter who says I can go back to normal. Let's say I don't feel comfortable yet doing that.
Right.
Where do I go for data? What do I do to find data that I trust to help make that decision? And what questions should I be asking, I
Right.
guess?
So look, I think that this is going to be a tough decision for lots of businesses. All right. And so first of all, we can't completely ignore that our government leaders, our state and local leaders, are going to be providing some level of guidance on what the health side of this is. So you're right. So the first part of the business economics is, do I understand the real health risks or not? What would it, has the government decided there's still risks or not of reopening? Is that generally supported by the kinds of information I'm seeing more broadly? And then based on that, what will that mean for my business, right? There's sort of a fundamental question of, right, how is your business doing? How critical is it to be in person or open that way?
Right.
And then how can you, what is your both tolerance for having to deal with these things, and how can you protect your employees? And so then there's sort of, so you're forced to first look at data from the health perspective, and then you just have to assess your own company perspective. What are your financials? Right. What is your performance looking like? How effective has remote working been? At the extent you can do that, is that not possible? Are there smart ways you can stagger your workforce to minimize health risks? And so some of that's going to require just some thoughtful modeling of how your business works and what would be the consequences for the business and for the finances of your business of different approaches. And so I would say scenario planning is a really tool in this context. Thinking about, all right, well, if we do this, these are the consequences. We do this, these are the consequences. And again, what's so hard about this is you are literally being asked as a business owner to combine a health epidemic with an economic situation. And so, but those are the kinds of things I would do. I would look at, as I said, I think that there are good data sets. We've been doing a lot of looking at, states are putting out some data sets on the testing now, or at least getting some read on that. There's a lot of interesting economic data coming out. The labor statistics are coming out pretty regularly. And so there are some insights there. There's also sometimes random data sets. I mean, we've been looking at some data from on alcohol sales, which have not surprisingly skyrocketed, right? And so sometimes there's other things. Again, I'm not saying that will be helpful for opening your business, but I'm just saying there are other sources that you can sometimes turn to. And we're trying to publish a lot of that on our website. I'm just sort of putting out different data sets that could be useful for that purpose.
When you guys decided to go back to work, I was on the phone with the CEO the other day doing another interview, and we were talking about how he planned to sort of bring everybody back. And he talked about how his employees actually came up with the plan. They convened sort of a Zoom committee on reopening, and they actually came back with the proposal on how to do it. And I thought that was a fascinating way to do it, is to say, we want you, we want to come back to work. We want to get everybody back to work as soon as we can, but we're not going to do it until you guys feel comfortable with the plan on how to do it. And he tasked them with coming up with the plan, and they're going to follow it. Based on what the employees decided they wanted to do. I mean, that seems pretty smart to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously depends on the firm and sort of things. I mean, we have a business continuity committee that we formed when this all started, that we meet 4 days a week, and we discuss sort of these different things. We get health updates. What are the government numbers saying? We get business updates. And then we discuss sort of, okay, what are our plans? Right now, we're still in work from home mode, and we envision that for a while. We are thinking about what our exact plan would be, but we are in a business where we can work from home and be effective. And it's been effective enough that we don't feel at this time that we have to rush that, where there are other businesses where they might feel more economic pressure to do so. So, but obviously, when we get to the point, we need to create an environment where our employees are comfortable and feel safe. And that's going to require some planning and, different things. And I don't envision a scenario where everybody's back in the office at the same time. I envision some real staggering as being sort of probably the first phase when that does happen. And so it's a challenging problem. But I do think, look, engaging your employees at this time is a really helpful thing. As I said, we have daily meetings, we have daily staff meetings, we have, our entire office has meetings, and we have smaller team meetings as well. But we've brought everybody into the fold just for the purpose of communications. In fact, I'm having office hours this afternoon on Zoom. So, and we're going to talk to, anybody wants to come talk to me about a question they have about the firm. We're going to have, sort of old school office hours and do that. So we're all trying to find creative ways to communicate with our employees and help, also run a business at the same time.
Yeah, that's a hard question how do you manage everybody's concerns and issues and fears and the anxiety and the things that we're dealing with on a personal level, but at the same time expect productivity of some sort from people at home, right? And I know that's something that everybody's struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, we have very good numbers. Like we're a business that has large components that are hourly work. And so we have good numbers on that, but we also have made a real concerted effort to make different types of work available to different employees so that we really are mixing it up for them, and quite frankly, it's been a real team effort on our coronavirus studies, which is something that sort of has been this big rallying for our firm where we're putting out these studies. And so people are doing a lot of different things, but everybody wants to do part of some coronavirus study because they think it's really interesting. And, so I think that's been, in an odd way, that has been one of our rallying cries as a firm, is we're like, well, we have expertise, we can do something with this. Let's get these studies out for people. And I think it's, that's been actually a really good cohesion building thing, which is not what I expected when we started to do it. So look, sometimes unexpected things happen, and that's great. I love it when we stumble upon things. I wish I could say I had all the great ideas. I don't, but sometimes things just work out.
Are you guys going to let, and I've been asking everybody this about when people want to come back, are you going to allow sort of a flexibility until there's a vaccine or something? Are you going to allow people, if they're not comfortable coming back, maybe they have an elderly parent that lives with them, maybe they have a child that has an issue or they have an issue, are you going to allow them for a while until they get comfortable? How are you going to handle that one or two employees that needs to work from home until there's a solution to this?
Look, we've always tried to put our employees first in as many ways as possible at our firm. And so trying to deal with these types of HR concerns, we are very proactive about it, and we work with people. And so the big thing is, let's open the lines of communication and see what we can do. I find there isn't any cookie cutter answer to these things, but I do think that if we're just open and honest with our employees and they're open and honest with us, we can find solutions and we can be sufficiently flexible. And I think that's the right way to handle this. I liken it to everybody's carrying a giant boulder on their shoulders right now, no matter what their position, like no matter whether whether they have an elderly person, whether they're just dealing with this, everybody's carrying a boulder of a different size and it shrinks and grows every day. So you just have to be extra. I mean, as much as I'm a data person, I'm also a people person. As a manager and a leader, you have to be more flexible. You have to try to be responsive. You have to show understanding the best you can. It's just a part of the current environment. And that's good practice even when it's not like this, but it's particularly important in this situation.
Yeah, that is a great way to wrap it up. That is a great note to end it on. Thank you so much, John, for being with us. This was really, really, really helpful, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rhett. Appreciate it. Great talking to you.
And thank you for spending some time with us here on the Power Lunch. You can go to the website, powerlunch.live, to look at the upcoming schedule. Got a great week planned for you. And until tomorrow, have a great day. Enjoy being at home. Hopefully you get the luxury of being at home. But if not, thank you for whatever you're doing. Thank you for helping out and being out there and helping move things along, and no matter what it is you're doing. And anyway, have a great day. Enjoy your family and the people that you're sequestered away with, and we'll see you tomorrow.